Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen across our beautiful country of Canada. Our friends around the world, which are actually diminishing quite a bit under the Trudeau regime, the fascist bastard. Welcome back to your favorite Angry Canadian on the 6th day of October 2023. I'm just having a little bit of fun. It's Friday. I don't feel like being serious. So I had such a good laugh when I heard George Galloway explaining that Donald Trump could become the Speaker of the House in the United States of America.
Simon, I appreciate it's breaking news. The story emerging in Washington is that Donald Trump has been nominated for the now vacant position of Speaker of the House of Representatives and has indicated a willingness to take that position. And as we speak, the Democratic Party is going into meltdown over the possibility, a year before the presidential election, of having Trump back in the Capitol, in DC, in the bully pulpit, and being able to direct events vis-a-vis the Department of Justice, the Hunter Biden affair, the impeachment of Joe Biden, and so on. I mean, can this really happen?
I can imagine all the scampering around the Democrats were doing with their lawyers and everyone. That can't be. We got to stop him. It was good for a chuckle. Anyhow, it's not only down in the States. We have such a crap show in Canada that it's mind-boggling. Who are these people in power? How did they get there? Well, that's easy. People got fooled. People don't care. People put up the bullshit, and then eventually they get scared where they don't want to say anything, or they'll be punished. And that, my friends, is a sign of fascism, communism, you name it, all the isms. Anyway, Keystone Cops, they're on the call. They're going out on their bicycles, everything. They got a major job to take care of here in Kelowna. Well, it's not the Keystone Cops, but look at that. I mean, stuntmen at that time took their lives in their hands. But what's happening now is that Kelowna has decided it's time to clean up the homeless encampment. You know, just make it, I don't know, pretty, even smell better, whatever. So they spent 3 days cleaning up, and the bylaw enforcement officers, which I kind of think of as the Keystone Cops, showed up in huge number. I mean, I didn't even realize Kelowna had that many bylaw officers. We must have a lot of people breaking the, bylaws, and that's not law, that's a bylaw. I don't know. Crazy. Anyway, they want the tents from joining together and have to have at least 10 feet apart, because being close together is a fire hazard. Now, I understand most people don't see it as I do. You know, we can agree to men having babies and gender assignment surgeries, but these homeless people, well, they're drug addicts. They got mental issues. They're criminals. I mean, they're just the bottom of the barrel. I don't look at it that way. I look at them as humans, people, somebody's father, mother, child, it doesn't matter. They're people. And the fact that in Western world, the homelessness is increasing, and you wait till this winter what's going to happen in Europe, because energy is going to be short. Things are shutting down in Germany. But let's focus on Kelowna. Kelowna is such a hypocritical city. They pretend they're so good, and K-Town, And they want to hide this situation away. I'm sure they wish somehow, somebody would come in with a big bulldozer and put an end to it. But that ain't going to happen. The situations are just getting worse all around the world. So as I said, and I keep saying it, I need a timeout. And my timeout isn't a chair or a room. My timeout is my new camera, which I love to use. Today I put a couple of the lenses to use, and they are my primary lens. One is a Sony G lens 105, and the other is a Zeiss 70 millimeter lens. By the way, those early bees had some kind of a mite on their forehead. I hear a lot about that stuff, but never see it. Tomorrow is video and picture day.
If you had told us just 4 days ago that the Biden administration was funding secret biolabs in Ukraine, of all places, we would not have believed you. Yeah, I don't think we're going to put that on TV. No thanks. Europe is descending into poverty. Did you know that? Had someone told you that? So the most advanced continent on the planet, the birthplace of Western civilization, our civilization, is getting much poorer very quickly. It's moving backward at high speed. Just a year ago, Europe was a modern place. For example, the overwhelming majority of Europeans heated their homes with natural gas, as modern people do. In Germany, the continent's richest country, only about 6% of households, most of them rural, heated with cordwood. And you'd expect that, given that, again, Germany is a modern industrialized country with central heating and indoor plumbing and all the other trappings of a society that has moved beyond the medieval period. Last year, only about 6% of Germans used wood to heat their homes, but that has changed dramatically. Demand for firewood in Germany has risen so fast that there is none left to buy. You can't get it. So desperate Germans are now cutting their own wood, scouring the forests like their ancestors for sources of heat. So they call it biomass, but it's wood. They're burning wood, again, as they did during the feudal period. That's Germany. In Poland, families are standing in line for days to buy coal. Not in 1910, right now, tonight. Cars queued up outside coal mines, hoping for fuel. Quote, "This is beyond imagination," one 57-year-old Polish man told Reuters. "People are sleeping in their cars. I remember the communist times, but it didn't cross my mind that we could return to something even worse." Oh, but it's come. Something even worse has arrived. The French government has announced energy rationing this winter. Just the other day, France had so much energy that it exported it to other countries. It was a net exporter of energy. Now, there won't be enough heat in France for everyone in the country to stay warm. In the UK, 70% of restaurants are preparing to close, to go under. Why? Because when winter comes, they won't be able to afford to keep the heat and lights on, et cetera, et cetera. This is happening across Europe in every country. So the question is, why is it happening? And the answer is extremely simple. There is an energy shortage in Europe. Cheap energy is essential. It is the key to everything that a normal society strives for. Prosperity, safety, a longer life expectancy for its citizens, everything depends on cheap energy, but Europe no longer has it. And as a result, things are falling apart very quickly. Energy costs in Europe are expected to increase by hundreds of percent in coming months. Germany's year-ahead price of electricity, that's the benchmark for all of Europe, it's measured in euros per megawatt hour. That price just exceeded 1,000 euros for the first time in history. For perspective, just a week ago, last Monday, the cost was about 700 euros per megawatt hour, and that was a record. In other words, the price rise is approaching 50% in a single week. In France, electricity went up 25% in one day. That was last Friday. Imagine that happening to you. If there's one thing we have learned about the people who make the rules, it's that they have no intention of following them. Any of them. Ever. Ever. They command you to wear a mask as you jog alone in the park while they head to dinner barefaced at the French Laundry. That happened. They harangue you about the carbon footprint of your lawnmower as they fly to Aspen on their private jets. You see that every day. How many members of Congress who voted to expand the police powers of the IRS don't pay their own taxes? More than a few. How many politicians who fervently support gun control have armed bodyguards that you pay for? Well, let's see every single one. We could go on and on and on. Whatever they're demanding that you do this week, you can be dead certain they are not doing it themselves. Everyone notices this. It enrages people, but it's often misinterpreted. People say this is hypocrisy, but it's not. It's privilege. In the old America, every citizen was considered equal under the law, as well as in the eyes of God. Everybody had to follow the same rules because nobody, underneath it all, was more important than anyone else. We were all citizens. Citizens is a term you rarely hear anymore. Citizenship implies inherent rights, rights that politicians cannot under any circumstances take from you because they did not bestow them in the first place. You were born with them. If you don't have cheap natural gas, you can't run the continent. Now, if you've got a graduate degree and live in a city in the United States, you may be shocked to learn this. You may never have heard this before. You may have believed that fossil fuels were on their way out any day now. And you thought that because the Davos people and our own leaders assured us of that for decades. They told us that green energy was the future, and the future is here. It's here. As recently as last month, the World Economic Forum claimed that Europe could save, quote, $1 trillion in fossil fuel costs by switching to renewables. But it turns out, and this may not shock you, they had no clue what they were talking about. They knew nothing about the subject they talked about endlessly. Green energy cannot replace fossil fuels. Not now, not anytime soon. Fossil fuels remain what they have always been, the key to civilization. That is true now. That has been true since Homo erectus started the first cooking fire in a cave nearly 1 million years ago. So-called green energy is not close, is nowhere near replacing gas and oil and coal. It's measurable. We could have known this. Anyone with 8th grade math skills could have figured out in about 10 minutes that we cannot replace fossil fuels with renewables or green energy. And of course, they must have known that. When they told you otherwise, it was just posturing. It was childish and destructive fantasy talk that apparently fooled millions of their citizens and millions of ours. The Green New Deal means what it always meant. It means poverty. And the people pushing the Green New Deal must have known that all along. They don't actually believe climate change is an imminent threat. If they actually believed climate change was an imminent threat, an existential emergency, the first thing they would have done, the very first, would be to ban private jets. Oh, but no. To this day, Al Gore still flies on private jets. Barack Obama owns tens of millions of dollars of beachfront property. He knows the oceans are rising. Come on. So they're all in on it. It's a scam, but they don't care because they know they personally will escape the consequences of their own policies. So when the French president announces that his people are facing the end of abundance, he's not talking about himself. He's not facing the end of abundance. None of them are. Macron and all of them understand they will always be rich and always be protected. They know that for certain. What's changed, what's so very interesting, is that suddenly everyone else who's been paying attention can see that they were lying. They are frauds, and the entire population of Europe now knows that. Donald Trump, to his credit, whatever you think of him, caught on to this early. 4 years ago, Trump warned Europe about its energy future during his speech at the United Nations. The German delegation laughed at him, but they're not laughing anymore. The Europeans have discovered that the real threat to human civilization is not global warming. It never was global warming. The real threat to people is global cooling, otherwise known as winter. Far more people freeze to death every year than die of heat. In 2019, for example, 4 times as many people died of cold as of heat. That's according to the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. So when temperatures in Europe begin to drop a few months from now, this is a huge problem, and that will be obvious to everyone. It's not global warming, it's global cooling. That's what's going to kill your grandmother. And when everyone understands that perfectly well, a lot of things are going to happen. The status quo will crumble. Factories will close. Unemployment will rise. Disposable income will disappear. And you're seeing signs of that already. Personal savings rates are down dramatically. In this country, 60% of Americans can't cover an expected $400 expense. Credit card debt increasing year over year by 13%. That's the biggest jump in 20 years. Total household debt set an all-time record of $15.8 trillion. That's in this country. It's also true, similarly, in Europe. So how will spiraling energy costs affect all of this? And what will be the cascading effect? Well, when the cost of keeping your apartment warm jumps by hundreds of percent in a single year, you become a completely different person. You change your behavior radically. You're no longer tempted to buy a new $1,400 iPhone, or shop at Whole Foods, or even pick up an extra cappuccino. The entire consumer economy grinds to a halt because there's no discretionary income. So it is impossible to overstate the downstream effects on the world of an energy crisis. Everything changes. But somehow it doesn't seem to be working. The same central banks that intentionally caused inflation, and they did, those same central banks are now hiking rates to destroy demand. The problem is, this isn't a demand problem. This is a supply problem. And it stems primarily from the war in Ukraine. Because of that war, the West does not have enough energy to continue its economy or its society. Europe responded to that war by imposing sanctions that they knew would inevitably cause energy shortages. They knew it when they did it. And they've been talking a lot about foreign policy for months. The White House has told us that if we're real Americans, if we love this country and aren't traitors, quislings, then we will wholeheartedly support jumping with both feet into a highly complicated conflict in an obscure part of Eastern Europe where we have no national interests. Why? Because Ukraine's borders are sacred, unlike our own, and if we're good people, we'll recognize that and not ask any questions. So that's been their argument. Though you may notice it's not actually an argument. It doesn't even approach an argument. It is a lecture. It is delivered at high volume with their signature freshman year self-righteousness. How dare you? No one from the Biden White House is actually trying to convince you of anything. They leave that for people they care about, like their donors. They're not telling you that what happens in Ukraine is more important than what happens in your own country, though obviously that's the underlying assumption. They certainly believe that. But they can't say it out loud. They rarely say anything they mean out loud. What they do and what they're doing now is they just yell at you about everything. Shut up, prole! Take the shot! Surrender that civil liberty. Pledge allegiance to Ukraine or else you're a dangerous tool of Vladimir Putin. It's a heavy hand. This, once again, is not subtle stuff, not a light touch. So why do they do it? Well, they do it because it works. You can see it on display in Washington. Even in that supposedly divided city, a place you hear a lot about partisan gridlock, nothing gets done. Well, some things get done. You'll note that not a single Republican leader has stood up to point out how insane all of this is and how completely divorced it is from anything that American voters actually care about. Just the opposite. If you listen to Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, you would think that what the average, say, welder back in his home state of Kentucky really wants, more than a pay raise or an affordable vacation or decent schools for his children, what he really wants is an end to Russian aggression against the brave people of eastern Ukraine. The Russian invasion of Ukraine was the end point of a much longer story. The propaganda campaign designed to convince Americans to take sides in this conflict, a conflict that has nothing, strictly speaking, to do with them or with America, that effort began many years earlier. We'd peg it to July 22nd, 2016. That's the day that WikiLeaks published thousands of emails from the servers of the Democratic National Committee in Washington. Those emails proved that party officials had rigged the democratic process, the primary process, in favor of Hillary Clinton and against the insurgent populist candidate that year, Bernie Sanders of Vermont. Within days, the chair of the DNC, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, resigned in disgrace. The WikiLeaks scandal broke on the same day that Hillary Clinton chose her running mate, Senator Tim Kaine, and it overshadowed the nominating convention that followed. But more significantly, the WikiLeaks scandal threatened to split the Democratic Party into pieces. More than 13 million Bernie Sanders voters, many of them young people, learned that the process they had always believed in was in fact a sham. They had been cheated. Democratic leaders had to act quickly in the face of this to deflect blame from themselves onto someone else. The DNC's servers, they claimed, had been hacked by the Russian military. The goal was to hurt Hillary Clinton, whom the Russians feared for her strength and wisdom, and to help Donald Trump, whom they controlled. Russia hacked the servers in order to hack the election. That was their story. The Washington Post ran with it the first day as if it were true. But there was never any evidence that it was true. Almost 7 years later, there is still no evidence. The DNC's story about its servers is a lie. But as a political strategy, that lie worked flawlessly. Russia made the perfect villain. It was a white Christian country with a traditional social structure. It was everything the Democratic Party already opposed. The foreign policy apparatus in Washington was happy to hate Russia again. After 40 years of Cold War, hating Russia was muscle memory.